Hi, I'm Carmen Hall, Community Assistance Director with Volusia County. I'd like to welcome you to the third of a 5-part affordable housing webinar series. These webinars are part of an affordable housing initiative effort that seeks to bring all stakeholders together to address affordable housing in our community. Step 1 of this initiative is focused on education and information, and that is why we are hearing from experts in various housing fields throughout the month of July. Last week, we heard about ways to produce affordable housing. We were fortunate to hear from Michael Anderson, Director, Housing Trust Fund Project, Center for Community Change in Portland, Oregon. Michael provided insight on starting a housing trust fund and identifying a dedicated revenue source. Ashawn Nesbitt with Florida Housing Coalition discussed various funding mechanisms for the development of rental housing. And Catherine McManus, President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Greater Orlando and Osceola County, talked about collaborative funding with private partners. If you missed the previous webinar, the recording is available on our website. Please visit volusia.org to find recordings of past webinars, registration information for future webinars, and all other updates relating to the Affordable Housing Initiative. Today, we will continue the conversation by discussing the important topic of preserving affordable housing. We are fortunate to have 3 panelists that will discuss efforts to preserve affordable housing. All attendees are muted and have video disabled to ensure the speakers can be seen and heard. After hearing from all speakers, we'll have a question and answer period. Please submit your relevant questions for the panelists in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can do this throughout the presentation. We'll have the panelists answer as many as we can during the question and answer session. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate your support during this process. Our first panelist is Kim Spence. Kim joins us from Florida Housing Coalition, where she is a technical advisor. With experience administering local housing and community development programs, and working with providers of affordable housing in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Kim also provides training and technical assistance to local governments and nonprofit organizations to build their capacity and ensure program compliance. And she also works closely with community land trust organizations around the state. Kim holds a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Florida Atlantic University, and is a certified community real estate developer and a certified economic development finance professional. Thank you for joining us today, Kim, and agreeing to share your expertise with the residents and stakeholders in Volusia County, Florida. We'll turn this over to you now so you can share your presentation.
Thank you, Carmen, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So today's webinar is about preserving affordable housing, and I'm here to talk about how a community land trust or a CLT can help to do just that. I'd like to start out by given a brief background of the Florida Housing Coalition. We are a statewide nonprofit provider of training and technical assistance. Those of you in the audience may be familiar with us as the technical assistance provider for the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, where we work very closely in the administration and implementation of the SHIP program. But in addition to that, we also work on anything related to affordable housing, from ending homelessness to first-time homeownership. About 20 years ago, the coalition started a program called the Florida Community Land Trust Institute. And through the Institute, we provide education and advocate for best practices for all public and private sector tools that produce and preserve housing. And so our particular emphasis under the CLT Institute is for equitable development and redevelopment, and also to prevent displacement in housing and maintain a character of communities, and of course, to preserve affordable housing in perpetuity. So I always like to start off presentations about community land trust defining exactly what a CLT is. The CLT model for home ownership is not a new concept. It's been around for decades, but there's still a level of education that is required because CLT home ownership is different from fee simple or traditional market rate home ownership. So a CLT is basically two things. It's the vehicle that separates ownership of the land from the ownership of the building, but it also refers to traditionally a nonprofit community-based organization that actually implements that practice. So the CLT organization holds title to the land, but sells the home or the improvement on the land to an income eligible household. And there is an agreement between the CLT and the homeowner titled the ground lease agreement, which is really stipulates the key provisions that are going to keep that unit permanently affordable. So this is a simplified explanation of how a CLT would work. But basically in development, we know that the cost of land can be extremely expensive depending on your community. In some places, it can be as high as 50% of the cost of the development of a unit. And so a CLT removes the cost of the land from the cost of the project, thus making the housing more affordable for that end user. So this image is showing how a CLT works for home ownership. An eligible household buys the home at below market price because the cost of the land again is deducted, and leases the land from the CLT. So the homeowner has a leasehold interest in the land, which is represented by the ground lease. And that ground lease contains a resale formula, which is the key provision that's going to keep that unit affordable permanently. The CLT permanently owns the land, and the homeowner pays a nominal monthly ground lease fee to the CLT that may cover some administrative costs. The magic happens at the time of resale. So the current resident, when he decides to sell his home, will sell their home to another income qualified buyer. And that buyer, in turn, is also going to enter into a ground lease with the CLT and is also subject to the same requirements if they decide to resell at a later date. And permanent affordability for a CLT is accomplished, again, through that ground lease. There are resale restrictions that limit the resale price, and there are also income eligibility requirements as well. Some of the other provisions in the ground lease that ensure permanent affordability is the reduction of property taxes. In Florida, there's a state statute that determines how the rate at which CLT homes can be assessed. And so the property appraiser actually has to determine the taxable value of the land and the home based on that restricted resale formula that's included in the ground lease. So essentially, a CLT homeowner will be paying less in property taxes than their neighbor because they're paying a nominal tax on the land, if anything at all, and they're being taxed at the resale restricted value of the home. Another provision in the ground lease that ensures permanent affordability is the CLT right to repurchase. So in the event that a CLT home is going through foreclosure or even at resale, the CLT is able to repurchase the home and that way keep it in their inventory so that they can ensure that it is sold to another income eligible household for that reduced sales price. One of the key differences between a community land trust and other community-based nonprofit housing providers is the stewardship role of the community land trust. And there's a stewardship function pre-purchase and also post-purchase, and that's the key difference between other nonprofit organizations. One key function of the CLT in terms of stewardship is the provision of homebuyer education. In typical down payment assistance programs or purchase assistance programs, we know that the home buyer does usually participate in a home buyer education class, and the same is required for a community land trust purchase. However, there are specific components for that home buyer education for a CLT purchaser to ensure that they really understand the difference between fee simple and CLT home ownership. And the reason for this is you want to avoid any conflict with the homeowner if they decide to resell, and if their neighbor is selling their home and walking away with $100,000, for example, there might be some issues if they're able to, if the CLT homeowner sells and only is walking away with $50,000 or just less than the market rate sale. And so it's important to address that up front and to have for that homeowner to have an understanding of the difference between CLT home ownership. And also to be able to calculate themselves the resale formula at any point during their tenure in that home, so they know, if they ever decide to sell, they have an idea of what they would be able to walk away with in terms of equity. Now, the post-purchase responsibility of the CLT, there's a lot of different things that the CLT will do and to stay involved with that homeowner once they purchase the unit. So the CLT maintains contact with the homeowners through different outreach events or newsletters. They make sure that the CLT homeowner is paying the correct amount for their property taxes based on that Florida statute law I discussed. But some other key provisions is really to help that homeowner if they decide to eventually sell their CLT home and move on to fee simple home ownership, to prepare them for that next step. So a CLT may offer financial literacy counseling or other services to help that homeowner be successful. Other post-purchase responsibility that is very important and unique to the CLT is the ability to assist with mortgage payments in hard times. So if a CLT homeowner has some life event or is struggling to pay their mortgage, the CLT can actually step in to help with that mortgage, can negotiate with the lender, or can refer the CLT to another program in the community that might be able to help them. And so having this involvement after purchase really helps CLT homebuyers to be successful. And we have seen in various studies that a CLT homebuyer, low-income homebuyer, tends to have a lower risk of foreclosure than a low-income homebuyer that purchases a market rate home. So a community that is looking to preserve affordability or to address a community that has been disinvested by increasing home ownership levels, a CLT is a good match for that. And then finally, of course, the resale procedure is something that the CLT was definitely going to be involved in. If a CLT homeowner decides to sell, the CLT handles the entire resale process. So it makes it very easy for the seller and the buyer, because the CLT is able to basically have home buyers lined up and handle the entire process in-house. So one of the questions that we often get asked about CLTs is, why would a home buyer agree to limited equity, which is basically what the resale formula is doing? And the messaging around CLTs has to be clear that CLT homeownership is not intended for everyone. The ideal CLT home buyer is someone that is currently renting and that has been locked out of the home ownership market, and that even with traditional down payment assistance programs probably could not afford or qualify to purchase a home. So the ideal CLT home buyer is a renter who desires home ownership, who wants to build equity, but is not yet ready for fee simple home ownership. So we see CLT home ownership as the stepping stone between renting and fee simple home ownership. And so this chart here is just giving you a comparison of CLT homeownership and demonstrating that it is an alternative to renting and the bridge to fee simple homeownership. So in the second column here under renting, we have a household that's paying $1,400 a month for rent, which they might be cost burdened. And when they move from that rental unit, their return is zero. They're walking away with nothing. If a renter purchases a CLT home, they're going to have more than likely a lower monthly payment. So in this case, $1,000. And if they decide to sell in 10 years, and there are a lot of assumptions in this scenario, but if they decide to sell in 10 years, they could walk away with over $31,000. So you can see that's a great opportunity for someone that's renting and has no return when they move on to another rental unit. At the same time, in fee simple homeownership, it's still a lower monthly payment than renting, but of course, there's no limited equity in a fee simple home. It's market rate, so there's an opportunity to walk away with much more there if that homeowner were to sell. But a CLT homeowner is still going to be interested, a potential buyer still interested in CLT home, because that $32,000 that they can walk away with when they sell could also be used as a down payment on a fee simple home when they're prepared to move on. And so in short, these is the benefits of CLT home ownership for the individual household. Of course, the price of the home is more affordable and it makes home ownership attainable for lower income families. There is a return of equity upon resale, so families in CLT homes are able to build wealth that can also be passed on to future generations. They're making mortgage payments instead of rent payments, so there's that financial stability that comes with that, and they don't have to worry about rent increases, every time they renew their lease. Like any other homeowner, their mortgage interest payments are deductible, and they also have a homestead exemption. And of course, the benefit of having that CLT organization, they're providing that stewardship to ensure that the CLT homeowner remains successful. And as far as the benefits for the community, the CLT is going to create permanently affordable housing. It's going to provide an additional home ownership option for renters. Many local governments use their SHIP funding or home funding or other local funding sources to create home ownership opportunities, but those resources are always limited. There's never enough to address the need. And so having a CLT strategy will also increase the number of home ownership units that can be created. The CLT also makes public investments go further. And that's to say, local government that invests SHIP funding, for example, in a down payment assistance program will be able to help that one individual household to achieve home ownership. With the CLT strategy, that one investment in one unit is going to be able to help generation after generation and homeowner after homeowner, because that SHIP funding is assumable to the next buyer. So it makes that limited public resources go much further. And a CLT also guards against displacement in gentrifying communities. And so that happens because the CLT strategy requires is removing the land from the speculative market, which reduces the market forces and how that appreciation or depreciation will affect a CLT homeowner. So this slide I put in here just to emphasize that even though we're talking about home ownership and everything I've said thus far is about home ownership, CLT also works for rental. It works for commercial as well. We have seen CLTs around the state that are now starting to look at mixed use developments, and most of the CLTs also are involved in either rental development or managing rental property. So this helps with the sustainability of the organization. And for rental, it's basically the same approach as the home ownership in that the CLT owns the land. The CLT could be the developer in a deal, or they could be a co-developer depending on the scale of the deal and their experience. And that ground lease is also there to ensure that there's permanent affordability. So as I mentioned, the Florida CLT Institute was started 20 years ago, but we did see growth in the number of CLTs around the state in the mid-2000s, just before the housing bubble burst, because prices were just skyrocketing. And so local governments were looking for ways to address the need for affordable housing and turn to the CLT model. We are now again seeing an influx and a resurgence of that growth in the number of CLTs. And so some of the reasons for that increased interest, again, is just subsidized housing units are being lost from the affordable housing stock when those homes are going to be sold, or if the affordability period expires. And so a CLT can help to increase and to maintain that inventory of affordable housing. We also see that housing prices are outpacing income, and so local governments are having to provide more subsidy to fill that gap between what a homeowner can afford and the purchase price. And at the same time, their funding sources may be diminishing. And then also another reason is this whole concept of the recapture and approach, which most local government use, which basically says when a home is sold, like in a down payment assistance program, when that home is sold, the seller will repay the local government the subsidy that was provided to them initially, or a portion of that subsidy. But again, because of the increase in housing prices and the rate of which housing prices are increasing, that subsidy is typically not able to help another buyer purchase a similar home in future years. And so this again is a reason why local governments are turning to CLTs to be able to make that one-time investment that is going to be able to assist multiple purchasers going forward. And so this map is showing the location of CLTs around the state. The little blue houses are CLTs that are active. Most of these were created, as I said, back in the mid-2000s. And then the red ones are showing the newly formed CLTs. Most of these formed within the last couple of years. And at the coalition, we've worked with the majority, if not all of these CLTs in some capacity. So you can see we have CLTs all around the state in very different markets, very different circumstances. Some of them have different goals, but in the end, the strategy works in all markets. So one of the points I also want to emphasize is that a CLT, as the county looks at this as a strategy to implement, is that it doesn't replace any of your existing strategies, but really it complements existing affordable housing tools and any other strategies you're looking to add going forward. CLT can maximize the use of any government-owned surplus land for affordable housing. It works very well with the SHIP program, as I've mentioned, and with other subsidy programs like the HOME program. It can preserve affordable housing that is created by inclusionary zoning ordinance. So if the county is looking at inclusionary zoning as a way to increase the supply of affordable housing, this has worked in other communities where the CLT can partner with that market rate developer to help implement that IZ program. A CLT also contributes to redevelopment and making sure that neighborhoods are, that residents are not displaced and that the neighborhoods maintain their character. And it can also help to stabilize declining or disinvested neighborhoods. And the reason that is because a CLT can come in and purchase land, or when prices are still low and there's that opportunity. So as the local government or the private sector invests in a community and prices start to increase in those areas, the CLT is already there with land that can create and preserve affordable housing units. And so the next few slides are some examples of CLTs around the state, and to demonstrate how these CLTs work with some other affordable housing strategies. The first one is the Community Land Trust of Palm Beach County. And this CLT was created in 2006 by Palm Beach County as an independent nonprofit organization. Since that time, the CLT has 62 single-family homes and townhomes in their portfolio. They have about 80 multifamily affordable rental units. And they also have currently in their pipeline about an additional 24 single-family and townhomes as well. So initially, this CLT was started with funding from the county. Yes, excuse me, sorry. This CLT was started with funding from the county, operational funding over the first 2 years to launch the CLT. But over time, the CLT also is able to secure funding from corporate grants, construction funding from local government, and also developer fees and property management fees. So in the case of this CLT in Palm Beach County, one of their major projects that they did a few years ago was the Davis Landing West project, where the site was donated by Palm Beach County. And over time, the CLT was able to build 16 single-family homes and 8 townhomes. In addition to the donation of land, the county also provided home funding, which was used as gap financing. Another example is the Delray Beach CLT, and this is an example of how a CLT can contribute to maintaining a neighborhood's character. In Delray Beach, the CLT was actually started by the CRA back in 2006, and the CRA was being very forward-thinking because they knew as they implemented their strategies that housing prices would increase in that area. So they started the CLT early on to make sure that residents in the area were not displaced. And so this partnership is still going strong, and both the City of Delray Beach and the Delray Beach CRA supported the startup of the CLT and are still providing ongoing operating support, as well as funding for construction and also purchase assistance. So currently the Delray Beach CLT has about 90 units in its portfolio, and it also manages 37 rental units that are owned by the CRA. So that's another source of funding for the CLT. And then finally, this last example is the Hannibal Square CLT. This CLT was established in 2004 to preserve affordability in Winter Park. And what prompted the start of this CLT was a desire to preserve the Hannibal Square neighborhood, which is a predominantly African-American area. And so again, over time, this CLT has had to adjust and to grow to be sustainable. And a few years ago, their board voted to expand their services outside of Winter Park and into all of Seminole County and Osceola County, and they also work throughout the city of Orlando. So the CLT has projects coming up in the next 3 to 5 years that's going to triple the number of units, including some mixed use and some commercial uses as well. So the last thing I want to touch on as we continue to explore this in Volusia County, this strategy is key decisions when starting a community land trust, and whether you're going to start a new CLT, whether you will use an existing CLT, or whether you could use a strong capacity nonprofit already in the community that may be able to add a CLT program to their operations. So some of the key decisions that would have to be made is, what would the CLT focus on? What geographic area will it cover? A number of CLTs focus on specific neighborhoods, or it can be as wide as serving the entire county. Will the CLT focus on home ownership or rental or both? What is the role of the CLT in the development of properties? Or will the CLT only be a steward for the properties and not do development? Where will it be housed? Is it going to be a new 501c3, as I mentioned, or an existing nonprofit? And how is it going to be governed? As I mentioned before, traditionally CLTs are nonprofit organizations, and a classic CLT usually has a tripartite board that includes representatives from the community as well as residents of the CLT. And so that's how that community-owned land is maintained, and the residents and community members are able to make decisions about the future of the community land trust. And so that is my presentation for today. I'm gonna turn it back over to Carmen and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kim, for that inspiring insight into the world of community land trust. We'll join you again during the question and answer panel after our final speaker. Our second panelist is Corry Brown. Corry is the Housing Projects Coordinator with Volusia County Community Assistance. Corry oversees the implementation of federal and state grants received by the county to be used for affordable housing. She is responsible for programs that create new housing, as well as those that help to preserve housing. Millions of dollars are received on an annual basis, and additional funds are received sporadically to address unmet needs after natural disasters or to respond to emergency housing needs during the pandemic. Corry is an expert on several housing topics and will speak to us today about state and federal funding, mechanisms used by the county to preserve affordable housing, homeowner and rental. Thank you for joining us today, Corry, and sharing your extensive housing knowledge. Please take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Carmen, for that introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here. As Carmen noted, I work with community assistance. I'm in housing and grants administration here for the county. And what that means is I eat, sleep, and breathe Volusia County affordable housing. So for that reason, I'm very honored to be a part of this conversation, and I'm excited to hear all the experts speak on the topics. I've enjoyed listening to everything we've covered so far over the last couple of weeks and look forward to more presentations. I'm going to talk briefly about what preserving affordable housing looks like from a local level. Just a small disclaimer, when I say local level, I'm just referring to funding only, funding and grants. how we implement our programs. I don't want anyone to start submitting questions about land development regulation because I won't have any intelligent answers for those. So let's save those ones for next week. So first I want to go over our funding sources just briefly. Then I'll talk about what homeowner housing looks like, rental housing, and then we'll look at what that means moving forward or how we can use this information to move forward. So most of you are probably familiar with Housing Choice Voucher, but it's more commonly known as Section 8. So that is an annual funding source that we have that keeps rental tenants in their units by providing a subsidy. We have Emergency Solutions Grant, Community Development Block Grant, and Home Investment Partnership Program. Those are all annual sources that we receive from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then we have the SHIP Grant, State Housing Initiatives Program, and that is an annual grant received through the state from the Sadowski Housing Trust Fund. Now on ESG, SHIP, Home, and CDBG, I did note that they're annual grants, but that does not mean that they are consistent or that we always know exactly what we are going to get. I just want to throw that out there because it's an important thing to consider as we include these sources in our long-term plan. We usually receive these grants, but it is not guaranteed in any way. For example, this last year, we did not receive any SHIP funding, and this current year, we expect to receive about 2.5 million. So they're great sources. We're very grateful for them, and we implement a lot of programs with these sources, but they are simply not guaranteed. Let's take a look at homeowner housing. Preserving homeowner housing is primarily done through 4 different strategies that we implement. We have home buyer assistance, housing rehabilitation, new construction, and acquisition and rehabilitation. So homeowner assistance program, home buyer assistance program, sorry. So that's, a lot of people refer to it as down payment assistance. This is a very important program where we help a household that would not otherwise have the opportunity to become home buyers, and we provide down payment assistance for them, purchase assistance plus closing costs. And that's done through a 0 interest deferred payment, 15-year loan term. And what that really means is that if the home buyer remains in the home for 15 years, then it's free and clear. You know, we have a second mortgage on the property that we hold. That way, if they sell the property right away, then we get a return back on our investment. And that's, you know, they would have to pay back the loan or a portion of the loan that we provided in the beginning. And we also have a shared appreciation feature, which helps at times like right now when the housing market is increasing quickly. If someone turns around and sells the property right away, we get a portion of that appreciation that they earned when they sold the property. This program is implemented through Affordable Housing Partners. Now, I wanted to, each program that we talk about, they're very good programs, so don't get me wrong, but I still want to talk about the fact that we do encounter barriers. There are barriers, there are gaps that we're always evolving, always changing to try to address, but it's important to point out what things do we encounter when we're implementing these programs. With home buyer assistance, I feel like I'm going to keep mentioning the market, but the housing market is difficult or can make this program very difficult to implement, and it makes it difficult for the potential home buyers. So these home buyers have, you know, a subsidy. They're not the free and clear buyer that some sellers would wish for. Some sellers, if you are choosing between all the different buyers, like right now, where you might have several different offers on your home, you're probably going to choose the cash buyer or the purely conventional loan buyer. You may not want to choose the buyer who has restrictions, who has a subsidy that they're using to purchase the home, who will have to have an inspection. I mean, we all think that everyone should have an inspection before they purchase a home, but when the housing market changes, that doesn't always happen. Creditworthiness is another important barrier that's faced on behalf of the potential home buyers. Even though we're providing a subsidy, that home buyer still has to qualify for their own first mortgage. So it's important that they're in a good place where they can actually afford a mortgage payment and they can show that to the first lender, and they have to be credit worthy. Now, one thing that we've done to help solve or help with this, mitigate this issue with home buyers, is we work with Mid-Florida Housing Partnership, and we work with the University of Florida Agricultural Center they put on home buyer courses, and every one of our potential applicants is required to take that course. So that helps them know what's involved in buying a house. What do I need to do to be ready? How do I get there? How far off am I? So that's one of the ways that we help with that. And there's also credit counseling and home maintenance courses. So those are very helpful. One barrier that's going to be faced in every single program is the grant funding requirements. We are restricted. We can't do whatever we want. We can't help whoever we want. There are restrictions, as you would expect. So income level, of course, all of our programs have income limitations. Moderate income would be those that earn less than 120% of the area median income, but more than 80%. And those are most likely to be the households that are most prepared to purchase a home or most willing to purchase a home. But we can't help that group very often. And that's because the home funding source doesn't allow us to help above 80% of the area median income. And while the SHIP funding source does allow it, it's very restricted because we have income requirements that we have to meet. We have spending requirements that we have to meet in the very low and low income categories. So that's always a difficult thing. While we want to help those that earn the lowest, they're going to have the hardest time purchasing a home. Lastly, one of the barriers is maximum sales price. Again, broken record, the housing market, but that's an issue right now because homes are increasing in price. And so even if we were to provide a very large subsidy, even if we explored that option, it won't help because we cannot allow our applicants to purchase a home that's beyond the maximum sales price set by the grant. Next, this program is very important when it comes to preserving houses, housing rehabilitation. So this helps people who are already in a home. They already own a home. It's already affordable to them, but they have health or safety repairs that they cannot manage to take on. So this keeps them in their home in a safe situation. So if we don't step in this situation, what happens is they either continue to live in a situation that's unsafe, which could result in other problems, or they have to leave the house. Sometimes they're so bad that we see those situations where people are looking to, have to move out of their home, and then they're now in that group of people that's seeking affordable housing, rather than being in the group that's already in affordable housing. We have different components to this program. It might be something small, like the AC pictures shown here. This is a HVAC system that was changed out because that is a major health or safety issue. If you have no heating and no air in your home, especially right now, I would say, in the heat. But sometimes it's a bigger project as well. The home may not be structurally or economically feasible to repair at this time, and we may have to pursue demolition and reconstruction. Sometimes it's right in the middle of those and it's a rehabilitation project. And we also have a wind hazard project or wind hazard strategy where we're able to fortify homes so that they do not incur as much damage if there is a storm or any kind of bad weather. All of these programs differ in what the repayment provisions are, the loan terms, with emergency repairs like roofs or HVAC systems. We're able to provide the assistance as a grant without having any sort of security instrument on the property. And those would be everything, those would all have to be things that are under $25,000 in cost. And then for the bigger projects, it may be a deferred payment loan, or it may be a very small payment that we have determined the home buyer can afford to pay back. So what kind of barriers do we encounter when it comes to rehabilitation? This time, I'm not going to mention the real estate market, but the housing construction market. Honestly, right now, we've encountered so many issues lately. For a while, it was lumber that was an increase in cost for our contractors, delays. Right now, it's windows. We just encounter change order after change order or delayed project after delayed project because contractors can't get the number of windows that they need to complete projects. On the side of the homeowner, they have a few barriers that they have to determine whether they can handle or not. One of them is temporary relocation. That's voluntarily, they decide to relocate if they have a project that requires it, and they have to find somewhere to live while the home is being repaired. And we will have a security instrument on the property unless it's one of those emergency repairs that we talked about. So although if it's not affordable for them to repay any of the assistance, it is deferred. Some people still, they do not want another lien or mortgage or security instrument of any kind on their property. So that's something they have to look into. As I mentioned before, there's always going to be grant requirements. So income levels, environmental assessments that are required with certain federal funding, mitigation that sometimes has to be taken along with that, flood zones, historical areas, things like that. And then this time we're not encountering a sales price maximum, but we have a maximum just value. So if somebody applies to us and we can tell they're low income and they really need our help and their home needs repaired, but their property is valued too high, then we are unable to help them. I wanted to talk about new home development. So I think on surface level, you might be saying, how is this preserving affordable housing if you're talking about development? But this program is really neat, for a lack of a better word. I love this program. What we're able to do is take county-owned lots that are identified as being suitable for affordable housing, and we use grant funding to build a home. We're not building mansions, we're building good homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, decent homes. And then we turn around and we sell that home to an income qualified buyer, giving them a subsidy just like we would with the regular home buyer assistance program. And this categorizes as preserving affordable housing because just like with HBA or home buyer assistance, we now have a security instrument on the property and they stay in the home for 15 years, or if they decide not to, then they have to pay all of the loan or a portion of the loan back to us. So this, just like homebuyer assistance, it's a 0% interest deferred payment loan, and we do the 15-year term. So what do we encounter with this one when we're talking about barriers? The construction market, again, this time we're building a home from the ground up. So any delays that are out there when it comes to the residential construction market are going to be, built into this program. The number of available lots. So right now we're very lucky. We just received what I would call a good amount of lots that are available to build on. And this is done through growth and resource management. But we don't know we never know when we'll get more, how many there will be, and how suitable they will be for residential property building. So this is required to be done by the state every 3 years, that we identify these county-owned properties and we add them to our list. The county goes way above and beyond on that. We do it frequently, and we just recently completed the process and we're able to add, I believe, 15 new lots to our list to start building on. And what I mean with suitability, so we only add lots to the list that appear to be suitable for building residential homes. But sometimes when you actually get into it, you find out a little bit more about the parcel and about the suitability for building. We recently had this lot that's shown on the screen. That's a very big lot. It appeared on surface level that we could build 2 units. So we were excited about that. We entered into a contract with a contractor and we were ready to start the process. And it actually turned out that we were just a few feet short of having 2 lots. You're probably thinking, no problem, just a few feet, request a variance. Well, when we start going down that process, we realized that because the parcel was in the Blue Springs priority focus area, where there's more stringent restrictions, and we all want to be more careful about the pollutants or any possibility of pollutants in the area. So there's more stringent restrictions on the septic systems that are placed there, especially on the irregular lots. So after pursuing all the different options, we actually determined the only way to go was to build 1 home instead of 2. Not a bad situation, still a win-win. We still took an empty lot, built a house on it, and that home will be sold to an income qualified buyer. So that's a good situation. It's a good outcome, but we were hoping for 2 and we got 1. Those are some of the things that we encounter. And as the seller, we determine the selling price. So some people might say, well, just price it really low so you can help homeowners even more, or help the low income households even more. But we really have to be careful. We have to consider the neighbors, the neighborhood, because we don't want to bring down the property value, especially putting a nice new home there. We would hope that we wouldn't do anything to harm the property value. And because most of our projects are implemented differently, we don't encounter a lot of NIMBYism, but this is one area where we can. We don't encounter a lot of it, but sometimes people see us building a home and they don't want, they express concern over having that home built next to them or in their neighborhood. I think we hopefully are always able to show them that it's a good home and it's not a bad situation, but it is something that we encounter. Rental housing development and rehabilitation. I really love to show these pictures because a lot of people, when they think of rent restricted housing or low income housing, this is not what they picture. They picture something, not as beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. And these turned out great. We certainly can't take credit for them. They're, the first two pictures that are shown are large multifamily developments. And we just had a small role in that. We partner, of course, with developers and with other funding sources. And we were able to, leverage some of our funding to be a part of those great projects. And the last one is a duplex unit where we partnered with the Housing Authority, New Smyrna Beach Housing Authority, to build those homes for seniors. So these are great projects where we assist developers, nonprofits, housing authorities with our funding, and we provide, just like everything I've noted, we provide a loan that has no interest or low interest, deferred or small payment. There's so many different situations, and these units will remain affordable for 15 to 20 years. On these large complexes, of course, our funding does not restrict the rents on the entire complex. It's a set number of units that we actually have to approve the rents that are within certain limits during the entire affordability period. So what kind of barriers do we face with rental? As I said, with these large multifamily complexes, that takes a lot of money to build a project like that. So that's not something that we can, in general, put up the funding for, but we can partner. That's really the only way to break through that barrier, is partnering and collaboration. Developers can't, they're not evil in any way. It's not like they don't want to build affordable housing, but they cannot do so without the proper incentives or some way to earn a profit or make it possible for them to develop the units. Because these are generally large. We did look at the smaller units as well, but they do take a lot of time to build. So that's something that we encounter. And tax credit projects through the request for application process through Florida Housing Finance Corporation. If you caught last week's webinar, we had a Sean Nesbitt discuss a little bit more about this topic and other funding sources. But this process can be very difficult and it's very specific. So the county always looks to partner with developers during the RFA process. I shouldn't say always, but almost always looks to partner and provide the funding necessary for them to meet their local government opportunity goal in the 9% tax credit. But there are a lot of specific requirements and we can only choose one. We go through a solicitation, a competitive solicitation. We support that project, but the reason I noted it as a barrier is just because we have done it quite a bit in the past and we like to continue to do it, but there are a lot of requirements and it's a moving target to hit. And of course, anytime we have these long-term affordabilities, that is a staff commitment that we have to consider for the entire duration of the affordability period. We monitor the units, we approve the rents when new tenants come in or during annual recertifications. So those were all related to construction or repairs or development. But I wanted to take a look at just regular rental assistance programs. So housing choice voucher or Section 8. I think we can all agree this is a pillar of preserving affordable housing for so many renters out there. Without these monthly vouchers, a lot of people would have a hard time maintaining their housing. We have tenant-based rental assistance programs. Rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention are funded through the Emergency Solutions Grant and primarily implemented by nonprofit organizations that we work with, like Halifax Urban Ministries and the Neighborhood Center. And so these are all programs that provide some sort of rental subsidies in different ways with different requirements to different income levels, people of different situations. Some of them are specific to only people who are homeless or people who are at imminent risk of becoming homeless. So what are the barriers with rental assistance? So a lot of the programs are only short term. They might be a 6-month or maybe 12-month, maybe even in 3. So they're not meant to support housing in the long term. Somehow we have to get that person housed and then worry about the rest later. That's sort of the methodology used with rapid rehousing. Like, let's get them housed first, and then we'll figure out how they can maintain their housing and how they can work through their other issues that they need with supportive services. Supportive services are not something that that we do with a lot of our programs for homeowner housing. Some of the rental that's implemented through other organizations, they have other services they can provide. And then we have to ensure that the services are not duplicated. This has become even more relevant during the pandemic with so many different funding sources coming out and being distributed to several different organizations and even governments, several organizations implementing rental programs all in the same area. So it's definitely a barrier that we've got to constantly be aware of where the funding is coming from and who's receiving what services, so that we don't have three of us paying someone's rent. I did want to talk about CHODOs. This is a common thing that people want to hear about. It's and it can technically be for homeowner housing or rental housing. That's why I put it toward the end here. A CHODO is a community housing development organization. So this is important because this is actually required funding. So we receive a home allocation from HUD, and HUD says you must use 15%, at least 15% of that toward a set aside for CHODO projects. So a CHODO project must be implemented by a Volusia County certified CHODO organization. So what that means is they've showed that they meet the CHODO minimum requirements, which relates to their board status, organization structure, their relationship to the low-income community, and their capacity, staff experience and capacity. So CHODO projects, we primarily have seen it used locally for rental projects. It can be used to acquire and rehabilitate homeowner or rental units. And what we do in the county is we do a competitive solicitation or a notice of funding availability for any previously certified CHODO organizations whenever we have funding available. We currently have 2 certified CHODOs, one that's done projects with us previously, Mid-Florida Housing Partnership. And then we have another organization that's met the requirements to be a certified CHODO, but we haven't had a chance to do a project with them yet. This is an important topic to talk about because, like it or not, this is part of our long-term plan because it's a requirement. And I don't mean to make it sound like it's bad. CHODOs are not bad, but what I mean is we will find a way to have this in our long-term plan as required, but we still have some choices to make. What types of projects do we want to fund with the CHODO set aside? Do we want to increase the CHODO set aside? They say that we have to use at least 15%. Do we want to use more? Do we want to use other funding? Do we want to dump in more home funding? Do we want to dump in some SHIP funding? We can look into these other scenarios. And then do we want to mirror the CHODO methodology and fund other projects that are similar to this, that are, and just do the same thing, but with different funding and maybe not called CHODO? Do we want to expand the CHODO program? We've explored this option before. It's still definitely on the table, but a couple of years ago, staff looked into why do we only have one CHODO? Is this normal? Because at that time we had one. Is this normal in other jurisdictions? How have other jurisdictions gotten more? Do other jurisdictions have a problem with not having enough CHODOs? And we greatly enjoy working with the CHODO that we have previously, but it's still worth exploring, could we somehow get more people on board with this so that there are more options, more development happening? So we went through that research process, and we definitely found that we weren't alone, but that's still something that we could explore in the future, is putting more energy into finding ways to expand the CHODO program. So of course I can't not pat ourselves on the back a little. I won't read every single accomplishment on here, and I'm sure that everything we've done is not on the screen, But in the last 5 years, just to kind of bring a picture together, and I don't do this to make it sound like, look, we're already solving affordable housing. You know, this is just one piece of the puzzle. And these are very important programs that we're able to have the outcomes that are listed here on the screen just in the last 5 years. So a lot of people are helped with these programs, and a lot of housing is preserved through the use of these programs. So what does this mean moving forward? How can we use this information? I do want to say one thing that we've done already is expanded the role of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. The council has expanded their role beyond what's required of the state in order to receive SHIP funding. And that they've done an amazing job. They've taken that extra responsibility and ran with it. They've explored community land trusts. They actually had Kim, they went out and found Kim and other guest speakers that were experts on CLTs and asked her to speak so they could learn more about CLTs so that they could make a recommendation to county council about, you know, the possibility of having a community land trust. We're always working on enhancing our partnerships and building, collaborating, building more partnerships. We work with public housing authorities to assist them with developing housing and even making repairs to their housing, but it's something that we can always, you know, look to do more of. And then I already explained CHODOs and how we can look at CHODOs moving forward as well. All right, so I just briefly went over a lot of topics. Feel free to reach out to me or submit questions in the question and answer panel or in the box there, and I'll be happy to answer those. Here's my contact information if needed. Thank you.
Corry, for explaining what preserving affordable housing looks like from the local level. We have one more panelist, and then we'll bring you back for the question and answer session. Our final panelist today is architect Kara Lennard. For the past 12 years, Kara has served as a project manager and compliance coordinator for housing authorities throughout the central and southeast regions of the United States. She has been responsible for projects involving millions of dollars in capital improvements to existing low-income housing with an emphasis on 504 ADA improvements. This includes designing new home construction for people with mobility impairments. Her current role as Director of Development for the Housing Authority of the City of Daytona Beach. She joined a dynamic team to help facilitate the innovative conversion of 300 apartments for the elderly and people with disabilities and 335 family units. This was done through the HUD Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, known as RAD. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from Kara about the RAD program. Thank you for being here today, Kara. I'll turn it over to you now.
And I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us on the call today, who is interested in learning more about preserving affordable housing within our community. Would like to talk a little bit about HUD's Rental Assistance Demonstration Program that is available to help public housing authorities preserve housing for low-income persons in our community. And so, in an overall view, we call it RAD on a casual basis, but we all know how fond HUD is of their acronyms. So RAD actually stands for the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. Typically, housing authorities have two major programs to help assist low-income persons in their community with finding housing. For example, our agency has apartment buildings that we own, and those are referred to as public housing. We also have a program, as Corry mentioned earlier, through the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or more commonly referred to as Section 8, where we provide vouchers for low-income persons in our community to go out and seek apartments that are not owned by the housing authority, but are owned by private landlords that are willing to participate in the program. So over time, HUD has developed the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program in order to help preserve and improve public housing properties. And so they've done numerous surveys and had various contractors come out and take a look at the existing public housing apartment stock and realized that there's a $26 billion deferred maintenance backlog and a $35 billion capital fund needs in this program, in the apartments that the Housing Authority owns. And so they started the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program in order to help bring funding to these sites and help to stabilize affordable housing within our communities. So what we're doing is we are converting public housing into the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It allows us to leverage improvement funding from private and public sources. It converts public housing, whose funding has been prorated over the years, to the more stable Housing Choice Voucher Program funding in order to, as we've been talking about today, preserve affordable housing moving forward in our communities. We'll be discussing in this program protecting residents' rights during this process. We'll be discussing maintaining public control of these properties. And then we're going to be discussing more the shift to the Section 8 funding. And here we have an illustration of what our Windsor and Maley high rises, which are on the Halifax River here in Daytona Beach, what they are going to be looking like after we get done with our RAD conversion. So let's talk a little bit more about leveraging improvement funding. It allows us to leverage private and public debt in equity in order to reinvest in our public housing stock. So traditionally, HUD provides us grants for operating public housing and for making capital improvements to our public housing. And then that, along with the rental income that we receive, is what we use to maintain our housing. Our housing, over half of our stock of public housing, is over 50 years old. And while it was built to last, and our staff has done an amazing job in keeping it up, it's looking its age, it's acting its age. And through the limited funding that we have available through HUD and our inability to work like private landlords do in order to borrow or use other funding sources in order to make improvements to our housing. As you can see, this picture of one of our units in Pomona Park, we've done everything we can in order to keep this going. It's just gotten to the point that it needs a larger investment. So the improvements that we are looking to make are not just paint and new fixtures, but we want to make improvements in order to help the residents continue to live successfully within these units. We're looking at energy efficiency. We want to lower the cost of living there. We are looking at whatever abatement activities need to take place in order to make it continue to safely live there, involving lead-based paint and sometimes asbestos abatement. We're looking at major infrastructure improvements when it comes to capital fundings and maintenance improvements. There are things we can see, there are things we can't see. So it gives us a great opportunity to take a look at the plumbing infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure, and make those major improvements to our properties. We look at modernizing the units. We make sure that the units are meeting the current standards for modern living. So for example, in this Palmetto Park unit that I'm showing here, these units are only equipped for the installation of washers. There are no facilities for dryers. What they use for drying, there's actually drying racks outside, clotheslines outside for drying. And so as part of this improvement, we're looking at bringing in both washers and dryers for these units, something we expect, day-to-day living in our households that aren't available because of the age of this stock. And then making improvements to accessibility is something that I have been a big champion of, for the last 20 years, is making sure that our facilities are available and accessible to people with disabilities. And also to people who may be visiting with disabilities. So making sure that we're bringing these older structures up to current standards. Another program available through RAD is a transfer of assistance. So my previous housing authority that I worked with, we actually got rid of some older sites that weren't really suitable anymore for our purposes, and then transferred those to new construction. It's not something we're working on with this one, but it is something that's part of the RAD program. So we're converting to housing choice voucher program. It allows for stabilized rent subsidy. There's no proration on it. It allows for chosen mobility. So after you're with the voucher program for a certain amount of time, if you have a job opportunity in another city, you can take your voucher with you. It also allows for home ownership conversion. So you can actually take your voucher, like the lovely Smiley family did here, and convert it into a mortgage payment. And so it's one of the opportunities that are available through this program and other programs that we have. A big part of the RAD program is making sure we're protecting our residents' rights. We have many, many meetings with our residents leading up to this because change is scary. And we want to make sure that we're opening the conversation, we're having active conversation, and we're getting input on what they want for their community moving forward. And so we have discussions about right to return, making sure that they are aware that under this program, when we make changes, they have the right to come back to this development. They have the right to come back to this development without rescreening. So it's not like we can hold them to a higher standard. We're not kicking them out, which is a big fear that we get from our residents. As I said, we look for their information and input. We want to know what they're interested in. A big thing in our communities is making sure that we have safe communities. We have, we have programs and activities for the children within our communities. And we want to make sure, the big one was washers and dryers. It's a big thing they wanted to see. The rent remains unchanged for our returning residents. That's another resident right that we're protecting. And we're maintaining the same basic rights under the lease for our residents. This is a picture, the Library of Congress did a series of pictures. And this is one of the early pictures of one of our developments that have since been demolished under the Hope 6 program. This is Pine Haven. And we have the two young gentlemen here in front of the sign. So I always enjoy looking at the history of where we've come from and more importantly, where we're going. Maintaining public control is another big portion of why HUD is doing the rental assistance demonstration program. They want to make sure that public housing is being preserved, ongoing public stewardship, ownership or control by a public or nonprofit entity, and preservation of housing for low-income families. So they want to make sure that all these safeguards are in place, and a lot of the process we're going through right now is HUD review and making sure that we're doing what's right for our communities. This is an illustration from our developer partner architect, DNA Architects, and this is an illustration of what one of our duplex community is going to look like after renovation and improvements. So funding is the big question that comes up during this. And so we are making a shift from public housing to Section 8 housing. And we want to make sure that our funding source is there and we're able to continue providing housing opportunities for low-income residents. And so under our current public housing units that we're looking to convert under RAD, we have the tenant payment, we have the RAD grant for capital improvements, as I spoke of before, and then we have the HUD grant for operations. After conversion, we are going to have the tenant payment as before, but we are also going to have the housing assistance payment or the HAP payment, which is through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. I would like to thank you for this opportunity again in order to talk about this program. And I think we're moving into questions and answers at this point, aren't we?
Yes, thank you, Kara, for that informative presentation and for giving us valuable information about the RAD program. We're now going to welcome back all of the panelists. We have the opportunity to present questions to them that have been submitted by the audience. First, Corey, we have a question from Diana. How can you find out where the new developments are located?
Okay, great question. So when we always advertise in some manner, when we do a solicitation, this could mean so many different things. If we're talking about a large multifamily development, then of course it will go to county council. We do have an affordable housing inventory. The state of Florida through the Schimberg Center has an affordable housing inventory to show, all of the different, I shouldn't say all, most of the different affordable housing that is in some way subsidized. They have a map that you can look at. And so we've linked to that from our webpage, and we add information that we feel is not reflected on there for some reason. So in follow-up, I can provide that web page. But that's really the best way to get a comprehensive look at where the developments are. As far as right when they open, I don't think we really have a mechanism that we use to alert people. The developer would advertise in their own way to seek income qualified tenants.
Okay, great. Kara, we have a question from the audience for you. Is RAD a HUD grant program?
It's actually a common misconception because HUD is known for their grants, that RAD comes with a funding source, and that's not the case with this. The funding comes from actually leveraging other funding sources. Public housing authorities also have the opportunity to bring existing grant funding into this, but no, it doesn't come with its own funding.
We have a question from the audience. How do the county's programs support self-sufficiency?
All right, I can take this one. So a lot of our programs, don't have a self-sufficiency feature to them. If you're talking about homebuyer assistance, other than the home ownership courses that I discussed, credit counseling, things like that. However, we all know how important housing is in stabilizing people's home or maybe their income, their poverty levels. So getting people in stable housing is really important. But we do have a self-sufficiency program as part of our housing choice voucher program. And so that's a really amazing thing that helps households that choose to be a part of that meet their achievable goals that they set with a caseworker. And the goal, eventually they hopefully increase their wage. And as they do that, their rent contribution, their portion that they owe toward their rent compared to what Section 8 pays changes. But the increase actually goes into an escrow account that once they've completed the entire program, they receive those funds. So that's one of the ways that we support self-sufficiency.
Kim, we have a question from the audience. Since CLT homes are affordable, what are some ways that a local government can ensure that the organization is stable and sustainable in the long term?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the CLT is intended to be the long-term steward of the property that is in the CLT. And so as an organization or a funder or a local government that supports a CLT, you want to make sure that that CLT is going to be around for a long time. We are talking about a lease period that's 99 years and also renewable. So here at the coalition, recognizing the increase in the number of the CLTs around the state, one of the things that we saw was a need for some standardization in how CLTs operate. CLTs are very different and can be very flexible. And so a couple of years ago, we actually partnered with Freddie Mac to launch a CLT certification program, which is the first of its kind program in the nation, actually. And so through that certification program, we actually work with CLTs to assess the organization. We do an evaluation of the organization. We look at the legal structure, board composition, the financial capacity, their stewardship function to make sure that that organization is following CLT and general nonprofit best practices as well. And so through that program and of course support, financial support and other support from the local government, that ensures that the CLT is going to be around long-term and will be a partner that the local governments, and I said funders, can be comfortable, have been vetted and will be around to support and make sure those homeowners are successful.
That is great, thank you. Corey, we have a question from the audience. If assisted homeowners are allowed to sell their home and pay off the county, how can the programs guarantee the affordable housing is preserved, remaining in the affordable housing stock?
All right, so I think Kim even touched on this during hers, that's one, I guess you could say, negative aspect. You do a homebuyer assistance, you help somebody, you've increased the affordable housing stock by putting someone in an affordable home, but then they're allowed to turn around and sell the home, unlike CLT where there's some sort of mechanism that keeps, well, they're allowed to sell the home with CLT, but it keeps that land as part of the affordable housing stock. But what's important is that we do have the mechanism where if we definitely don't want to restrict people. If their income improves, if they determine that they need to move out of state to take care of family or to get a better job, we don't want to hold them back in any way. So while we encourage people to look for, a forever home, to stay in affordable housing, we certainly wouldn't want to hold them back. So that's why we have the repayment provisions. So they're encouraged to maintain the home, but if they need to, they can just pay back the loan. And the shared appreciation is really important to counteract things like the market increases. So yes, it's not an exact one-for-one exchange where we get their money back and we help. It might not help exactly one household, but it does help keep the program moving. So they sell the home, they pay us back the loan, they pay us back a portion of the appreciation, and then we're able to use that to turn around and help someone else.
Thanks, Corry. That's great information. Kara, we have another question for you from the audience. We discussed washer and dryers, but what improvements have your residents requested?
It's been, as an architect, an amazing opportunity to be able to talk to our residents and get a firsthand count of what they want, what they're interested in, and taking a closer look at that. COVID is, of course, put COVID-19 has put kind of limits on what we're able to do, but our residents have been real champions of coming on Zoom and letting it be known what they're interested in, what they need, and what they want within their community. A big thing that we've been hearing from them is making sure that their sites, not just their units, but their sites, their developments, their community, have access to resources for the kids in the community to have positive activities. And so they want sports courts. They want things like splash pads. They want engagement on the site. So there's healthy activities for the kids. Washers and dryers were really, really the big one. They want bigger spaces. And so, as an architect, taking a look at our units, they were built in the 60s, and they were built for the conventional thoughts during the time period that you've got an enclosed kitchen and you've got these separated spaces. And we've made a move recently towards more open floor plans. And so this gives us an opportunity to give the open floor plan, to give the kitchen that opens to the living room. So as somebody's in the kitchen preparing food, they can be engaged with what's going on with the rest of the family and the rest of the house. So it's been a great opportunity, and we look forward to continuing to work with our communities on getting them the resources they need for their sites.
Kara, that's great that you're able to involve your local residents in this process. Corry, we have another question for you from the audience. Will the county provide a local government contribution to any developers applying for tax credits through Florida Housing Finance Corporation this year?
Yes, so this has been, on my radar lately because the process is happening right now. It did catch us a little bit off guard. I think Ashawn mentioned that last week, that some of the parts of the process had changed with Florida Housing Finance Corporation. So in addition to changes that were made in the last couple of years to the amount of funding that's required and the number of projects that we're allowed to support, this year they changed the cycle a little bit. So those applications are due from the developers to Florida Housing Finance Corporation at the end of August. And so we did have a competitive solicitation process to solicit a developer that was going to apply through Florida Housing Finance Corporation so that we can look for a developer that we can support by funding to help them meet the local government area of opportunity goal, which is part of that 9% tax credit RFA process. And so that means we have to provide $460,000 to the developer. That's how much it takes to meet that goal. And so that it was just closed last week, and the evaluation committee and the county council will go through the evaluation process, and hopefully we'll award to one of the developers that submitted a bid or submitted a request, and then we'll be able to provide a letter stating that we'll support them so that they can submit their application to Florida Housing.
All right, thank you, Corry. Kim, we have a question for you. What policies can the county and local governments implement in order to be a meaningful partner for CLT?
So there are a lot of things that local government can do for encourage the success of a community land trust. Since a CLT primarily makes housing affordable by the removal of land from the cost of the development, one of the main things is the donation of land that is going to be free and clear to the organization. So Corry already talked about that's something that's already happening in Volusia County in new construction deals. I want to mention though that one of the things that we're holding up as a best practice is something that the city of Jacksonville recently did, and we're working with them to establish a CLT there now, is that they amended their surplus land disposition process to elevate a community land trust to the same level of another city department that might be looking at surplus lands as well. So that gives the CLT the opportunity to have a first look at properties that are available to determine if they're suitable for affordable housing and to be included in the CLT's portfolio. Another thing, of course, is also, and this is just affordable housing in general, not just for CLTs, but for the local government to look at land development regulations and zoning laws for any regulatory barriers and to work to remove those barriers. So that will incentivize the development of affordable housing, and also that the local government can prioritize longer term affordability than some of these funding sources require. And of course, in the case of CLT, permanent affordability. And the number one thing I think if we had an actual CLT on the line would be talking about funding for that organization is another key role that local government can play to ensure success. And that could come in the way of operating funding or construction financing, and also again, incentives that will support the CLT. So those are some of the things that I think would make a partnership between Volusia County and a CLT successful long-term.
Thank you for sharing. Corry, we have another question from the audience. I've heard that the county's housing funds aren't used in all 16 towns and cities in Volusia. Is that true, and why?
Great question, and something that I always like to clear up whenever we have any sort of presentation or public meeting. I right away, always want to tell people we don't have anything against, say, the city of Daytona or the city of Daytona Beach. I think some people think that we just hate them, and that's why we don't provide certain grant funding to them or implement certain housing programs in those cities. The grant funding dictates our jurisdiction for different programs. So if those cities receive that grant funding, then they implement their own programs. So no, we don't operate all of our programs in all 16 cities. It really depends on the funding source and the program, but there are cases where we aren't even allowed to implement programs in those cities because they have their own funding sources and they have their own programs.
Clarifying and providing an explanation. Now we have our last question. This is for Kara. What energy conservation improvements are planned?
Well, we did go over that quite a bit during the presentation. There's been a lot of great improvements recently made with energy efficiency. And so it's great that we're at this threshold in time that we're able to do low impact items in order to bring massive improvements to what we're paying and what we're also using in utilities for our sites. And so a lot of focus will be on energy improvement to our appliances, changing out from regular incandescent light bulbs to the LED light bulbs. Huge impact. Not only with making sure that they use less energy, but they make less heat, so there's less to cool. Upgrading our cooling systems can make big improvements. We're changing out our windows, so we're actually providing new windows that will add more efficiency to our buildings. And then other things, just the overhaul of the building can add to the energy improvement. So we're looking forward to this big change coming our way and helping out not only the community at large, but also the energy improvements that springs.
Thank you. Well, that is all the time we have for questions today. Thank you to the audience for your active engagement and participation. It is encouraging to see how many people desire to learn about and take part in this initiative. Kim, Corry, and Kara, once again, we are grateful to you and your organizations for making the time to talk with us and share your knowledge and expertise. Staff will review those relevant questions that were not answered live and provide written responses that will be posted on the initiative's website. Today's presentations have certainly given us all some things to think about moving forward. We have expanded on or added new tools to consider when preserving affordable housing. These tools will be extremely important as we work toward developing a plan. We still have 2 more webinars planned in this 5-part series. Webinars are being held every Friday in July at noon. Next week, we will hear from several experts on coordinated planning and land development regulation to promote housing for all income levels. Finally, on July 30th, we will hear success stories from the field from those who have put plans in action to create affordable housing. In August, the initiative moves forward with an affordable housing summit. The summit is being held at the Ocean Center in Daytona Beach from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on August 27th. Various guest speakers and panelists will discuss affordable housing topics, and attendees will participate in breakout groups during the summit. Following the summit, affinity work groups will establish a county-wide plan to address affordable housing. For registration or more information, please visit volusia.org. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to having you back here next Friday to continue on our journey. Please let others know about this opportunity and don't forget to register ahead of time on Zoom. Have a great weekend.